morning, everybody. This is Dr. Padma again from Blitz, and today we're going to be talking about reactive oxygen species. I want to start with our digestive system, food we eat, the oxygen that we breathe, how these contribute to the formation of reactive oxygen species. So, when we think about it, we eat food and through our through the mouth it goes into the esophagus, into the stomach, into our intestine, all over, and then through the large intestine. So when it goes through this entire process, it gets digested and glucose is released. Now where does the glucose go? The glucose from the intestinal lumen, where the glucose is being formed from. Now the glucose is passing from the intestine into the blood here. So once into the blood, it has to go to the cell, where it is finally going to be used to make the energy which is utilized by the cell. Now that's so the glucose from the blood gets into our cell. Now this whole thing is our cell. If you can imagine, zoomed in, this is one cell, and there is a central part of the cell is the nucleus, and there are different organelles. This here you see, this is the mitochondria. Now when we zoom out, this is how it looks. There is inner membrane, outer membrane. We don't have to bother about all that. Mitochondria is like the powerhouse of our cell. So all the food that we've eaten, once it is being degraded to glucose, now the glucose is coming into the cell, and that cell has to use the glucose along with the oxygen to form ATP, which is like the energy currency which can be used by the cell. So where is this ATP being formed? That is being formed here in the mitochondria. So the mitochondria uses this glucose and utilizes the oxygen that we are breathing to form the ATP. And so that's, if you again zoom into the mitochondria, the glucose has come in the form of, it's broken into pyruvate, it's come in and it goes through enough cycles, and the main system here is that when glucose gets metabolized, it releases something called NADH, and this NADH has got a lot of electrons in it, and that electrons is needed inside the mitochondria to produce like a proton gradient. These protons are the hydrogen plus. To produce a proton gradient, these electrons are needed, and these electrons inside the mitochondria, they go through something called an electron transport chain. Electrons are, literally they are transferred from one, this is, if you can imagine, this is the whole thing here is the inside the mitochondria, and the electrons are jumping. There are something called these are transport molecules which are complexes, which are present inside the mitochondria. These ones, complex 1, complex 2, 3 and 4. So anyway, they help in the transfer of electrons from the NADH, which is like the storehouse of the electrons. This NADH was released during the metabolism of the glucose. This NADH, now finally the aim is to transfer the electrons from the complex 1 to 4, and finally right there is oxygen. The oxygen accepts that electron which is being transferred from the NADH. It acts as an acceptor, and along with two hydrogen ions, these are the protons. Now these protons also are, because thanks to the electrons and thanks to that gradient which is being produced, the hydrogen ions from the intermembrane space, they are getting pumped through the ATP synthase. That's a channel, and that helps in the production, the phosphorylation, attachment of one phosphate to the ADP, so that this is a diphosphate, meaning two phosphates. It forms a ATP or a triphosphate, and oxygen also gets converted to water. So why are we talking about all this when we started off to talk about reactive oxygen species? Now this is all good for us, right? The production of ATP, because that's how our cells can survive, because they need the energy to survive. Now, and every minute, every second in our body, this process is going on. But what is happening during the process of this transfer? Remember, I told you from one complex to another when electrons are jumping. When it's happening, there are some oxygen free radicals, or the reactive oxygen species, are also being formed here from the electrons. When they're jumping here, oxygen is accepting it, and when it's jumping, it's getting reduced to O2 minus. And this O2 minus is very, very reactive. It's like a baby or a kid who's very reactive and goes around, takes out anything in the house and trashes it around. If you can imagine a kid like that, it's something like this. Very, very reactive. And what does it do? It's ready to disrupt things. Go and disrupt maybe the DNA in the cell or any other. It can kill the cell. So this needs to be immediately oxidized. Immediately it needs to be stabilized, and that is done by an enzyme called superoxide dismutase. And again, H2O2 is formed when it gets, but this H2O2 also is not very good. Even that needs to be stabilized. And then this H2O2 is acted upon by another enzyme called catalase, which releases water. So these are the byproducts of the oxidative phosphorylation, or the cellular respiration as such, which is happening on a daily basis, on a every minute, every second, that's happening inside our body. And so it's good that this reaction is happening, because we need that energy. We need the ATP, which is being formed as the end product of this whole cycle. But there is a damage also being done. It's like we need petrol for the car, and the petrol gets converted and the car is able to run because of the petrol. But there is also fumes, exhaust fumes, which are being produced, which is polluting the environment. It's exactly the same. The reactive oxygen species are polluting our cells. They're degrading. They are causing mutations in the DNA. So on a few reactive oxygen species which are being produced on a daily basis, our body has these kind of antioxidants, the superoxide dismutase, the catalase enzymes. All these do their job, and they help in cutting down the amount of damage which is being produced. But if the reactive oxygen species increases in number, and if the reactive oxygen species is lot more than which it can be metabolized, it can be stabilized, then that can lead to a lot of diseases. So reactive oxygen species in our body can also be increased, or increased production can happen where due to smoking, due to excessive alcohol. With aging, there's more reactive oxygen species being produced. Stress causes more reactive oxygen species. Pollution, radiations, unnecessary radiations, and bad lifestyle in terms of food or processed foods. All these can cause increase in the reactive oxygen species. An increase in reactive oxygen species is a precursor for oxidative damage, in the form of, it can cause mutations in the DNA. It can cause various diseases like ischemia or cardiac diseases and diabetes. All the inflammatory diseases can be caused when the reactive oxygen species are increasing in number. So this is about reactive oxygen species. I hope you understand about how important it is for us to lead a healthy lifestyle and what are the sources of reactive oxygen species and how we can keep the reactive oxygen species down by adapting a better and a healthier lifestyle. Thank you.